So, welcome back to Gospel First. Today we're in Matthew chapter 24, and we need the right tone before we begin. Jesus isn't speaking to frighten his disciples, he's speaking to steady them. This is not a chapter for panic, it's for people who want to stay faithful when the future feels uncertain and the world feels unstable. So, we're not chasing timelines today. We're not listening for what Jesus says is solid, what holds, what lasts, what anchors. So, let's begin. So we're in verses 1 and 2 in chapter 24 of Matthew, and this is where Jesus leaves the temple. So the disciples admire the buildings. Jesus responds in verses 2, "There shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." So this is startling for the disciples. Jesus reminds them that even sacred structure are temporary. God's kingdom is not anchored in buildings, it's anchored in people who trust him. The principle here is that faith is meant to rest in God, not in things that can fall. Next, in chapter 24, verses 3 to 8, the disciples ask privately. In verse 3, they say, "Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming?" And Jesus begins not with timelines, but with caution. In verse 4, he says, "Take heed that no man deceive you," in verse 4. He speaks of wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, and famine in verses 6 to 7. Then he says something important in verse 8. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Now, Jesus acknowledges trouble without dramatizing it. Hard times are not proof that God has lost control. Something to think about. When uncertainty rises, where do I turn first? And do I seek reassurance in Christ or in predictions? Next, we're in verses 9 to 14, where Jesus speaks honestly about opposition. He says in verse 9, "Ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake." Then in verse 10, he acknowledges that some will stumble. In verse 13, he anchors hope. "He that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved." Endurance does not mean perfection. It means remaining faithful. And in verse 14, Jesus adds, "This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world." Now, darkness does not stop God's work. What's the principle? Faithfulness over time matters more than intensity in moments of fear. Next, in verses 32 to 35, Jesus gives a simple example. "When his branch is yet tender, ye know that summer is nigh." That's in verse 32. He is teaching discernment, not obsession. Then he says in verse 35, "Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away." Now, everything else may shift. Christ's words remain steady. So, something to think about. What voices shape my sense of peace? And do I trust Christ's words more than circumstances? Next, in verse 36, Jesus makes this very clear. He says, "Of that day and hour knoweth no man." Speculation is not discipleship. Jesus redirects focus away from dates and toward daily faithfulness. In verses 37 to 44, Jesus describes ordinary life. In verse 38, he says, "They were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage." Life continues, even near great moments. He says in verse 42, "Watch therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come." Watching does not mean fearfully waiting. It means living with awareness and trust. The principle here is that spiritual readiness is formed through everyday faithfulness. Next, in verses 45 to 51, Jesus ends with a parable. A servant is entrusted with responsibility. He says in verse 46, "Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing." The faithful servant does not panic. He simply keeps doing what is right. In closing, here's something to think about. Matthew 24 is not meant to unsettle faithful hearts. It is meant to anchor them. If today the world feels unstable or the future feels uncertain, remember this. Jesus does not ask us to predict the future. He asks us to be faithful in the present. And his words, steady, true, and living, still hold. And that's it for today. Thank you again for staying faithful to the journey. May the Spirit continue to fill your heart and draw you closer to Jesus Christ. If your heart feels even a gentle nudge, I again invite you to subscribe and share so that we can spread the gospel of Jesus Christ together. And I'll see you tomorrow as we continue walking with Matthew in chapter 25. Until then, God bless.